Did you hear that strange sound? That's right, that's the sound under the Euphrates River, the longest and one of the most historically important rivers of Western Asia. But why does that strange sound appear? Why does the riverbed look dry? Does it hide something mysterious? Is this the setup for the fulfillment of a major end-of-the-world prophecy? In this episode, I will discuss these issues in more detail. Smash that thumbs up button for me, leave me a comment down below, and share this video with your friends, and let's get started. Before we begin, I have a little quiz for you. The question is, which three countries are located along the Euphrates River? Iran, Syria, and Turkey. Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Syria. Oman, Syria, and Turkey. Let's think together. Time is up. The correct answer is B, Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. The Euphrates River is a river located in the Middle East. The river is the longest in Southwest Asia, 1,740 miles or 2,800 kilometers long, and is one of two major tributaries of the Tigris-Euphrates River system. The river originates in Turkey and flows southeast through Syria and Iraq. Formed by the confluence of the Karasu and Murat rivers in the Armenian highlands. The Euphrates River descends between the Great Ranges of the Taurus Mountains to the Syrian plateau. It then flows through western and central Iraq to join the Tigris River and continue as Shat al-Arab to the Persian Gulf. Its valley was heavily irrigated in ancient times, and many great cities, some of whose ruins remain, were located along its banks. With the Tigris River, it defines an area known historically as Mesopotamia. Throughout history, the Euphrates River has played a pivotal role in meeting 85% of Syria's agricultural water needs. This vital water source has been utilized by the Syrian people for various purposes, including drinking water, agriculture, livestock raising, and even religious rituals. The river holds a significant place in the hearts of the Syrian people, with spiritual qualities attributed to it, symbolizing a profound connection between the community and the waterway. However, the reality is that the river is currently experiencing a concerning decline. The temperatures in northeastern Syria have risen by 1 degree Celsius in comparison to a century ago, accompanied by an 18 mm decrease in average monthly rainfall per century. These alarming changes have led to predictions that the Euphrates River may completely dry up by the year 2040 due to falling water levels and drought caused by climate change. The environmental impact of human activities poses a serious threat to the Euphrates, often regarded as the cradle of civilization. This potential destruction of the river could compel people to abandon the lands they have called home for thousands of years. Much of this is closely linked to the broader climate crisis the world is facing. The Middle East is considered one of the most vulnerable regions to climate change, which could make the region's water scarcity problem worse. Bad news for the environment means bad news for people. About 60 million people rely on water from the Euphrates-Tigris River system to sustain their lives, mainly in Turkey and Iraq. Since the 2000s, international cooperation on the management of the Tigris-Euphrates River basin has reportedly stalled, fanning the flames of local competition and geopolitical tensions between the river system's owners. This coming century is likely to see several water wars, where nations and militia groups compete for access to water resources. It's scary, isn't it? Nevertheless, in the Bible, this is a sign of a prophecy that we must be ready for Jesus' return, as stated in Matthew. Therefore, you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. The desiccation of the Euphrates River has brought to light ancient ruins and an intriguing cave. Some posit that these remnants are artifacts from ancient civilizations that have endured through the ages. Nevertheless, a local rumor suggests a more mysterious narrative, proposing that the tunnel leads to the incarceration site of angels, a notion drawn from biblical references. To be precise, the book of Revelation recounts, "Then the sixth angel blew his trumpet, and I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar before God, saying to the sixth angel who had the trumpet, 'Release the four angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates.'" So the four angels who had been prepared for the hour, the day, the month, and the year were released to kill a third of mankind. The number of mounted troops was twice 10,000 times 10,000. I heard their number, and this is how I saw the horses in my vision and those who rode them. They wore breastplates the color of fire, sapphire, and of sulfur. The heads of the horses were like lions' heads, and fire and smoke and sulfur came out of their mouths. By these three plagues, a third of mankind was killed by the fire, and smoke and sulfur came out of their mouths. For the power of the horses is in their mouths and their tails, for their tails are like serpents with heads, and by means of them they wound. What constitutes a fallen angel? Their primary objective is to bring about death, as illustrated in Hebrews 2:14, a fate shared with the devil. These entities are restrained until a predetermined time when they will be unleashed for their specific purpose. Notably, the book of Revelation describes the devil as the only other being bound, confined to the bottomless pit for a millennium. In Revelation, there is an account of the dragon, identified as the ancient serpent, symbolizing the devil or Satan being bound for 1,000 years. Other fallen angels have also been consigned to chains of darkness, awaiting judgment. According to 2 Peter 2:4, there is a certainty that the four angels bound in the Euphrates are indeed fallen angels, identified as Zagra, Plutus, Angela, and Losers. These angels are mentioned in Revelation 9:14, instructing the sixth angel with the trumpet to release them from their confinement in the great river Euphrates. The biblical text foretells that upon their release, a cataclysmic global conflict ensues, constituting the sixth judgment, marked by its sharp and overwhelming nature, resulting in the death of a third of humanity. During the unfolding of the third seal in the book of Revelation, a grim scene is depicted where a fourth part of the Earth's population faces devastation. The vivid imagery portrays a pale horse with its rider named Death, accompanied by Hell. This ominous duo is granted power over a significant portion of the Earth, resulting in widespread death caused by sword, hunger, and various afflictions, including those unleashed by wild beasts. Shockingly, this pattern continues as an additional third of the remaining 3/4 of the population meets a similar fate. The looming bloodbath is forewarned, particularly for the inhabitants residing in the territories linked with the Euphrates. Drawing on the symbolism from Old Testament times, the river served as a figurative tool in God's hands to symbolize the inundation of the land with adversaries, signaling dire consequences for his people. The river served as a symbol, depicting the destructive advance of the Assyrians, executing divine judgments upon Israel. According to Isaiah 8:7-8, it is stated, "Now therefore behold, the Lord brings upon them the waters of the river, strong and many, even the king of Assyria and all his glory. He shall come up over all his channels and go over all his banks, and he shall pass through Judah. He shall overflow and go over. He shall reach even to the neck, and the stretching out of his wings shall fill the breadth of your land, O Emmanuel." From the perspective of John, this very river becomes the setting for God's judgment upon the unsaved world. While the devastation is confined to a third of the total, the Euphrates, once the starting point of human sin and long under the dominion of Satan, is now subjected to divine scourge, as outlined in Revelation 9:14-16. A clear distinction is made with the use of the definite article attached to the four angels, marking them specifically. Although Revelation doesn't provide details about these angels, it does mention the four angels at the four corners of the earth. These are different entities, not bound, as astutely observed by Wolfe, who emphasized, "Good angels are never bound." 2 Peter 2:4. referring to God not sparing the angels that sinned, but casting them down to hell and delivering them into chains of darkness to be reserved for judgment, Jude 6, and the angels that neglected their initial estate and left their own habitation, they are now held in everlasting chains under darkness until the judgment of the great day. Taking on roles as leaders of the invading host, these angels, as highlighted by Beckwith, are now the focus of the command from the sixth angel. The directive is to release the 4 angels who had been bound, rendering them incapable of hindering the progression of the gospel. Matt 24:14. In Matthew 24:14, it is proclaimed, "And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come." At the appointed time for their release, malevolent forces are set loose upon a world that has turned away from God and his teachings. Additionally, the forces aligned with the Antichrist stand in opposition to the inhabitants of the kingdom of heaven, despite their possession of God's seal and the reception of his spiritual protection. Revelation 4:4-5. Jesus conveyed that if the days of tremendous distress were not curtailed, no individual would endure, or no living being be spared. Matthew 24:22. The passive construction of the verb loose, or to set free, indicates that God, as the agent, commands the release of these 4 angels. The number 4 symbolizes global consequences, evident in the widespread destruction these angels bring about, resulting in the demise of a third part of the world's population. It paints a vivid picture of a war spanning the entire globe, confronting the judgment of God. Throughout, God had restrained the forces of worldwide destruction, even though calamities were sent upon a third of the earth, affecting the creatures of the sea, ships, waters, and heavenly bodies. The intensity of his judgments escalates further after the opening of the 4th seal, granting death and Hades authority over the 4th part of the earth to inflict death through a sword, famine, disease, and the wild beasts of the earth. In the current context, we discover that a third of the Earth's population is now subject to demise. More specifically, subsequent to the plagues affecting a third of creation, God initiates a plague targeting the ungodly. This affliction is so severe that these individuals earnestly desire death, yet it eludes them. Consequently, due to the subsequent plague, a third of mankind meets its end. The Lord permits fallen angels to be instruments of mortality, and the role of human beings is to act as vessels for God, allowing him to manifest and work through them. Humans are not merely designed for labor, but for enabling God's work within and through them. Every action, in this sense, contains a trace of sin. Allowing God to work entails living for the welfare of the entire creation, acknowledging our unity with God and the entire cosmos, and dedicating our individual lives to the collective welfare. It's akin to a leaf recognizing its unity with the entire tree and dedicating its existence to the well-being of the entire tree. Sin, therefore, encompasses actions driven by individual desires and ambitions, manipulating others to fulfill personal goals. These individual sins contribute to competitions and violence based on the survival of the fittest principle. Engaging in actions that promote our collective identities while attempting to eradicate other collective identities constitutes collective sins, fostering competitions and violence at a societal level. These structural sins are ingrained in our behavior, whether consciously or unconsciously, as they are socially sanctioned. Society, without much questioning, embraces these divisions and the ensuing violence. It is only when we recognize our interconnectedness, interdependence, and the impact of our values and choices on others, taking responsibility for the state of the world, that we rise above our individual and collective objectives and aspirations. In the early 1820s, American missionaries believed they were entering the strongholds of Satan's kingdom when they first visited Bible-related lands. Under the Ottoman Turks' control, What would you think of a man approaching you of gigantic stature, long beard, fierce eyes, a turban on his head, which if stretched out would make a blanket, long flowing robes, a large belt, in which were 4 or 5 pistols and a sword? One Levi Parsons' interrogative tone highlights the fearsome nature of the Turk, who is portrayed as a modern-day Goliath figure. "What are we in such an empire?" he humbly inquired. "What is our strength before Leviathan?" 2. In their efforts to understand the terrible state of, early Americans in the Near East sought explanations for their political ascendancy over the Holy Land. William Goodell, who arrived in Turkey in 1823, compared the proud and pistol-wielding Turks to the Anakims of old, the massive foes conquered by the ancient Hebrews. In 1823, Jonas King accompanied Pliny Fisk on an overland journey from Egypt to Jerusalem. He described the desert of Sinai as a Sodom, filled with Bedouins who were fiends from the world. Below is ready to spring upon him at any moment. King wrote home from Jerusalem, "Oh, that you could be with me in Calvary, where I am writing, and hear the roaring of thee." From the minarets, Turks can see how the Holy Land is polluted. "Everything around me seems blasted and withered by the curse of the Almighty." During the early Republic, many Americans believed that restoring Christian purity to the Holy Land would lead to the establishment of the New World, Jerusalem. The Turkish Empire of Sin's control over the Holy Land remained a major obstacle and a key theme in eschatology. To fulfill its Puritan image as a spiritual Israel, the US must engage in religious struggles in the Holy Land and play a role in Jewish conversion efforts. However, before the Jews could be restored to Jerusalem, not as a Jewish nation like Israel today, but as a redeemed, the kingdom of Christ would require a reduction in Islam's control over the Holy Land. Before embarking on the US mission to the Holy Land in 1819, Levi Parsons stated that destroying the Ottoman Empire would result in the immediate return of Jews from the 4 winds of heaven. Christians struggled to accept Islam as a legitimate religion, leading them to question God's decision to give such power to a false religion. Early Western images of Muslims were based on fear and ignorance, depicting them as monsters with dog heads. According to R.W. Southern, medieval polemicists used the ignorance of triumphant imagination to create the first Orientalist legends, which arose due to Islam's influence. A distant religion that claims a direct revelation from God after Christ may not fit into a Christian worldview. Its very existence was divine. The scandal shook Christian beliefs, causing spiritual ruin, moral chaos, and justifying crusades. During the Reformation, the West was concerned about the Turkish threat to Europe, and the idea of the Antichrist and his empire was prevalent. Protestant biblical exegetes often believed that Islam and Catholicism were the 2 legs of a satanic colossus. The Turks, a term used to refer to all Muslims, were often viewed as the most recent form of Eastern culture. They ascended to the same status as the Babylonians, Assyrians, and Persians, and were associated with the enigmatic Gog and Magog. Protestants viewed violent attacks on Islam as anti-Christian. The crusade was staged on the discursive level of prophetic promise, where believers, like early American missionaries, faithfully wielded the sword of Scripture and its arsenal of analogy and explanation to ensure their spiritual supremacy. Martin Luther viewed Turks as anti-Christians who, like Ishmael, confused temporal power with divine election. The Turks were viewed as a divine punishment for Christians' infidelity rather than an independent religion. The defeat of the Ottoman military hegemony coincided with the spiritual reform of the Church. Luther exemplified the emerging Protestant belief that any weakening of the Turkish position directly signalized the imminence of the Judgment Day. As faith in a future millennium became a mainstream Christian belief, Protestants recognized the importance of the divine drama between the Church and Antichrist analyzed Scripture to predict the upcoming apocalypse. They believed that the Bible contained prophecies about Christian victory and the stages of history leading up to the millennium. One significant stage was the demise of Islam. Early American religious understanding of Islam was formed through a process rather than through extensive dialogue with Muslims or scholarly analysis of Islamic texts. Eschatological exegesis involves aligning scriptural symbols describing the time of the end with secular event timelines. Biblical commentaries fostered consensus-based interpretations of Scripture, particularly from Daniel and Revelation, and endorsed their conclusions. With some of the power of the sacred, formed an important foundation of Christian faith. Protestants used eschatological projection to justify their superiority over Islam, creating a significant influence in Orientalist literature. Protestant eschatology contributed to dehumanizing attitudes towards Islam and Muslims among educated Americans, influencing their cultural perspectives and religious beliefs. The millennial promise inspired missionaries to travel to Western Asia, providing them with faith in their mission. Although Muslim foes dominated the Eastern Mediterranean, the dark dominions of Islam were eventually illuminated by Christianity. Pliny Fisk, sent out with Levi Parsons by the American Board, reassured him that it is not more certain that the walls of Jericho fell before the ancient people of God than that the entire Mohammedan world will be subdued by the gospel. Early American missionaries associated the Turks with Old Testament nemesis like Goliath, Leviathan, and the sons of Anak. However, the book of Revelation depicts them as phantoms. This allowed them to portray those perceived as enemies of Christ in a more negative light. The eschatological imagination depicted Antichrist's forces as teratological in nature. Major European millennialists established a transatlantic interpretive tradition, which was continued in America by the first generation of Puritan settlers. The rise of Islam was predicted in the first 12 verses of the 9th chapter of the book of Revelation, 12, called the fifth trumpet. In the first of 3 trumpets of woe, the angel of the bottomless pit is tasked with bringing vengeance on corrupt Christianity. Commentators interpreted the angel's summoning of smoke from the abyss as a metaphor for the false religion of Islam, which obscured Christian teachings. The smoke produced locusts with scorpion-like tails, reminiscent of the early Muslims, or Saracens, who tormented Christians while spreading their religion from France to the east. Protestant exegetes associated Muhammad with the angel of the bottomless pit and considered the epithets Abaddon and Apollyon, meaning destroyer, appropriate for him. Prophet and his caliphs. Interpreters found it fitting that Islam, as a delusion introduced by the Arabian destroyer, emerged from a subterranean hell rather than from heavenly inspiration. Commentators viewed Islam as a superstitious form of worship that would soon fade away, highlighting its eclipse of Christian truth through the metaphor of smoke. Cotton Mather justified the Eastern practice of inoculating individuals against smallpox by claiming that the disease itself had caused pestilence and plague, which readers associated with smoke. Although the fifth trumpet had sounded before the Reformation and the Saracens' torment was historically documented, there was less consensus on the sixth trumpet, also known as the second woe, is the final plague before the Day of Judgment. Many commentators saw this event as foreshadowing the rise of the Ottoman Turks. Exegesis of the sixth trumpet in Revelation 9 explains how Ottoman horsemen were allowed to overrun the Byzantine Empire. The Turkish armies symbolized divine wrath against the third part of men, due to their idolatry. Some interpreters interpreted the fire, smoke, and sulfur coming from the horses' mouths as a reference to the Turks' invention of gunpowder and ammunition. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the next video.